last minute.
Good evening and welcome to the July 22nd, 2023 Appropriations Committee, the hours after 6 o'clock. And first item on the agenda tonight is the approval of minutes from the February 15th, 2023 meeting. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor?
Did you have a motion?
No, we
Oh,
didn't.
sorry.
A motion and a second for the record?
I'll move it.
Second.
Any discussion?
Guys, Janice moved it, I second.
Got that.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, minutes approved. Next on our agenda is the K through 8 schools fiscal year 2024 budget presentation. We are joined by Superintendent Greg Martineau.
So good evening, and I hate beginning meetings by apologizing, but I apologize for being a few minutes late. I did not estimate my travel time well enough, so I apologize. Just give me 1 minute before I pull up my materials.
Just a copy of the packet.
Thank you.
I included a copy of the presentation for the athletic complex,
Excellent.
in case there are any questions on that.
All right, so I believe Mr. Coder provided you with an electronic version of the pre-K through 8 Northborough recommended budget. It's actually, school committee voted as of February 1st. So my goal this evening is to provide you with an overview of the budget, provide you with context that we were operating in terms of budget creation, and then answer any specific questions you might have. After that, moving on to the regional budget. So I'll just start by saying that the budget process is a vision and mission exercise. Our vision is to educate, inspire, and challenge all students, and I emphasize all. And our mission really focuses on creating students who leave Northborough pre-K through 8 who are strong collaborators, critical thinkers, socially, civically engaged, healthy and balanced, and creative. The budget process, much like the town budget, begins in September. And one of the early on tasks that the school committee is involved in is goal setting. They set their budget priorities for the upcoming fiscal year, and that is an important process in terms of identifying what the budget priorities are for the upcoming fiscal year. It is hard to believe that it is almost end of February and heading into March. Obviously, the months of January through March are really key dates in terms of getting the budget prepared for a town meeting. So again, the school committee voted its approved budget on February 1st. Obviously, presenting the budget this evening to you folks. The budget hearing will be at the next Northborough school committee meeting, which will be March 1st, and then obviously town meeting in April. In terms of the approved budget goals, so the school committee did set a number of goals for fiscal year 24. One of the goals was to maintain class size according to its class size policy. The class size policy speaks K through 2 is 16 to 20 students per class. 3 through 5 is 18 to 22. And I will share that most of our classes are at the ceiling of our class sizes. In fact, when we entered into fiscal year 23 this summer, we did end up having to add 2 sections, a first grade section and a third grade section that we weren't anticipating as a result of summer move-ins. So that was unexpected, but those positions are incorporated into this fiscal year 24 budget. But weren't included in fiscal year '23. We did have to find the money to fund those positions. In terms of some of the other goals, so maintaining the district's capital assets, ensuring the budget goals are consistent with the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, meeting state benchmarks, making sure we're keeping updated with our technology, making sure that we are funding high priority areas that are outlined in the strategic plan or budget priorities that the school committee set. You'll notice in the budget presentation, there were a number of items that were set as budget priorities but were not funded in the budget before you this evening. So under recruiting and maintaining high quality support staff, some of the items that were not funded were creating a math interventionist position, creating health educator positions at the elementary level, establishing a 5th grade strings program, creating a K through 8 maintenance and grounds position, adding a special education team chairperson for elementary and middle school levels, increasing the instructional technology specialists, to create a daily presence at elementary and middle schools. Those were not funded in this budget. We are funding in this budget, though, a technology replacement cycle. We're also funding some items in the capital plan through the use of facilities rentals. And lastly, we're maintaining outdoor learning spaces, but we're not creating any new spaces. So in terms of the school committee created budget goals, most of the budget goals are not achieved through this budget process, in this FY24 budget, and this is primarily a level service budget at this point in time. So in terms of the budget process, so the budget process begins early in September for the school district. Principals, directors send their initial requests, working in collaboration with their teachers and faculty and staff, to the financial department. Those are usually due in October. Those requests are synthesized and organized to create the initial budget run. This year, the initial budget, preliminary budget, was $30,728,164, which was a 15.12% increase over fiscal year '23. Obviously, that number was not attainable in terms of moving forward with the budget number, but it is an important exercise in terms of getting educators and principals and directors to think about what do they want to try to accomplish and what would it take if money were not a concern. Obviously it is. From that budget number, the leadership team, principals, and I spent more time thinking about how to reduce that to a more reasonable and sustainable number. We continue to meet through the months of November and December. And in the month of January, we presented to the school committee a revised preliminary budget of 5.9% over fiscal year '23. The school committee asked us to continue to sharpen our pencil. We did that through the month of February, and again on February 1st, I did present to the school committee a budget of $28,001,227, which represents a 4.9% increase over fiscal year '23. In terms of the budget drivers for fiscal year '23, as we entered into the budget season, much like the town, as we begin the budget process, there are many unknowns in terms of budget variables. The budget variables included collective bargaining and COLAs, so we are in negotiations with our associations at this point in time, so that remains an unknown. As we began the budget process, we also learned that there's a 14% increase in special education out-of-district tuition costs that is set by the Office Services Division. We did advocate to our legislative delegation to see if that could be minimized, and we were told no. So that 14% is included in this budget before you this evening. Special education and transportation was also an unknown. We have learned that number. And then in terms of impact of inflation, the cost of goods and materials and costs of services have gone up. We are seeing the impact of that in this overall budget process. So in terms of the budget drivers, so again, speaking to more specifics, the out-of-district collaborative tuitions, we are seeing that as a budget driver for fiscal year '24. And we are seeing in this recommended, actually voted budget, a budget driver of $389,999. Transportation special education, we're seeing an increase of a little over $154,000. Salary increases in COLAs, a little over $600,000. Electricity and heating, again, we partner with town administration. The FY24 budget, we anticipate to see a $135,000 increase in electricity and heating. And then just in terms of substitutes, teachers, nurses, and leave of absences, we continue to see the impact of COVID-19 and policies around being out, not coming to school when educators are not feeling well. It has required additional substitutes as a result. In terms of budget reductions, so we did work closely with our special education student support team. We looked at circuit breaker, special education reimbursement offsets, and we are recommending using $1,350,309 as a budget reduction in this fiscal year '24 budget. We also are seeing circuit breaker special education transportation reimbursement offsets as a result of the Student Opportunity Act. That is a little more than $110,000. And then potential retirements and leave of absences, we're seeing a reduction of $221,189. And teachers have until January 15th to let us know, so that number became more clear as we moved to the recommended budget to the school committee. So the total budget reductions totals $1,682,014. We also did some additional work to see if we could find additional reductions from the preliminary to revised preliminary to recommended. We're seeing a reduction in salary increases in COLAs of $164,154. Additional reduction of positions, educator support professionals totaling $57,000. We are applying ESSER 3 funds to this budget, which totals $164,520. That is the parallel to the ARPA funds that the town received. And the school district has until the end of '24 to expend those numbers. We took a very conservative approach in using that money because we did anticipate that we would have a difficult economic situation as we headed into fiscal year '24. And then facility rental and revolving funds, we are planning on using $25,000 of the facility rental revolving funds to offset this budget. So again, the total offsets that we are applying to this budget from the 15% budget that we started with as in September is $2,726,937. So the fiscal year, again, '24 recommended budget or school committee voted budget is $28,001,227. which represents a 4.9% increase over fiscal year '23, for a total budget increase of $1,308,274. In terms of the breakout of that budget increase, 28% of that budget increase is for special education tuitions, so out-of-district tuitions. That is that 14% increase of out-of-district tuitions and a few new students who require out-of-district placement as a result of their needs. 11% of that increase is transportation special education. A little under 10% is utilities, increased electricity costs. About 5% is substitutes, and then salary increases represents about 46% of the total budget increase. So the fiscal year impact of this budget does include the reduction of 2 positions, educator support professionals. It does increase the use of circuit breaker funds, which could potentially impact the FY25 special education budget. We are using ESSER 3 funds, again, as I shared earlier. And again, we'll have to amend the ESSER grant. We're also using special education IDEA. It's a federal grant that we received to offset the transportation increase. We are also utilizing some of the facility rental revolving account. It just means that there's less funds available if there is an emergency of some sort that needs to be funded. And then enrollment. So the budget is predicated on our best known data at this time. So we are using enrollment data, which includes NASDAQ projections, but again, similar to FY23, where we had to add 2 positions to remain within the class size policy. That always is a factor. And for the most part, this is a level services budget. It doesn't add anything new from what kids are experiencing in the classroom in the compared to the 22-23 school year. So again, I spoke to what was not in the budget. So the leadership team did ask for a number of positions that they thought would be important to include in this fiscal year 24 budget. I did ask the leadership team to prioritize those. So the top 5 positions that are not included in this budget are the math interventionists, math educators, so coach, teen chair, reading tutors, and then ELD educators. So there are also some instructional materials that this budget does accomplish, but again, we moved those curriculum materials and items from the budget to ESSER 3. So a portion of ELA coordinator salary. So ESSER 3 requires the district to use a portion of ESSER 3 money for learning loss. So we're shifting the ELA coordinator salary, a portion of it, onto ESSER 3. It also funds the middle school science curriculum, the Envision math K-5 curriculum, middle school math curriculum, and it also funds student and staff devices. Again, so ESSER 3 is funding $164,520 of the budget. Not included in the budget is a strings program, so leasing materials. We also had, we're moving forward with an ELA K-5 curriculum, which totals $190,000. ST math materials, which totals $22,000. Math screening and diagnostic assessments, which is a little under $5,000. So not included in this budget, we are seeking federal grants to fund these purchases. Totals $224,575. There is a lot of grant money available. So again, we have written grants for the ELA K-5 curriculum and the ST math K-5, and we have not yet hard whether or not we will get the grant funding, but we're fairly confident. And then lastly, just looking at the past 5 years of budget requests that the school department has made to the town. I think if you go back to FY19, it was a 3.5%. FY20 was a 2.73%. Pandemic in FY21 was a 1%. In FY22 was a 2.47%. And then appropriated in FY23 was a 3.46%. So the 4.9% budget that the school committee voted is the greatest increase in terms of percent that the district has asked in the past decade. But I can assure you that we are not adding positions. We are not funding curriculum materials and supplies. This is a level services budget. And the variables that are impacting this budget are increased electricity costs, costs of salaries, special education transportation, and then out-of-district special education costs. So I will stop there and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Thanks. We're just looking for a confirmation of this. As I look at the numbers, it seems that if it were, that without this tuition, the out-of-district surprise, you would have been at 3.5%.
Yeah, so it's 1%, it's about 250, 260,000. So I think we would have been at 3.5% without the out-of-district special education tuition increase and surprises. So that is accurate.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I make through the chair, you got a $1.3 million increase. 390,000 of that is the special education. If you control for the special education increase, it's 918,000, which is 3.44%. So the non-sped portion of the budget, covering all your buildings and everything else, is going up just under 3.5%.
And if you take out electricity, another
Well,
0.5%. John, are there any tissues?
Sure.
It is frustrating, because it again, with a 4.9% budget increase, typically we would like to see addition of positions who are kind of moving toward some of the requests the principals made to achieve our goals that we set forth. But at this point in time, this budget does not achieve those goals.
Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Well, just one other question. In your presentation, you mentioned a loss of 2 positions. These are existing positions now.
Correct. So they are educator support professionals. So what we've done is we've looked at our student support services population, looked at their service delivery grids, and we've identified that students who are aging out, they're going to Algonquin. There are 2 less ESPs that we need in the budget as a result.
Oh.
So it's not
So it's
that-
still level service.
it's still a level service. And I'll caution the committee that, as students move from preschool to kindergarten, we try to anticipate and project their needs. At this point in time, we don't think they'll need positions, but due to the developmental age of kindergartners and preschoolers, sometimes the need doesn't present itself until they're in our system.
Just one of the challenges is, again, now that I understand that the budget's going up, 3% or 4.9%, et cetera. But over the last couple of years, at the same time, the student population has been going down. And this year, the student population is dropping by 5%. So if you look at this kind of as a cost per student, we're going up 10 and 11% a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple things. I think in terms of where we are, trying to meet the student needs, and how students are presenting. I think as we entered the pandemic and as we are exiting the pandemic, the needs of our students are far greater in terms of their social and emotional well-being. And I don't think there's a one-to-one correspondence where we can say we have 20 students less. Multiply those 20 students by the per pupil expenditure, that's how much our budget should be reduced. We are seeing our enrollment numbers have plateaued, and we are seeing, as projected, the next 5 years, we are seeing an increase in student enrollment, not to the same level that we saw in 2011, 12 to 15, but we are heading back. We are gaining more students. But I think the needs of our students are so great that it's important that we maintain low class sizes, that we maintain the social emotional supports that students have, behavior specialists, school psychologists, high levels of student support services staffing as well.
I'm just curious if you know off the top of your head, what's remaining for ESSER funds?
So this budget spends down all of our ESSER funds.
So there's no more ESSER funds?
No.
I think that's an important point to make.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of when I was going through this is that while there is a 4.9% increase, how much of that increase was actually driven by kids coming back from the pandemic and just getting back into the routine of being back in school, and how long does that actually take a grade schooler to get their feet back underneath of them and what special care they need. And so, looking back on fiscal year 21, when the budget only went up 1%, that was because we're in the depths of it.
Yes.
Now that we're coming up, it only makes sense that there's a corresponding increase in the budget to make up for that loss. I also think it's important to note too that I've never really thought of it this way, but how much the budget is actually driven by student population, and not just the number of students, but the types of students that come in. And to your point, when you brought up over the course of the summer, when more students moved in and then you need to hire 2 new teachers, it's a variable number that you don't know until the first day of school. And to have to plan for not only the number of teachers, but also, like in the budget that you have for special education and those, variables that come with them. They are people and they're all different. So it's kind of tough to put together a budget that's going to be 3.5% every year when you're dealing with people. So
Yeah, I think that too, the school committee did institute a class size policy and with redistricting. So I think in the enrollment projections that we're seeing, there are spaces for students in all grade levels if they move in. Where we found ourselves in the fiscal year 23 budget was that even with that class size policy, there weren't spaces in any of some sections of grade levels, and therefore we had to add class sizes. I'm not anticipating that we need to do that. I also think the real estate market has slowed a bit, and I think that it was a perfect storm this summer with people selling their houses, young families moving in, and the school department feeling the impact of that.
yeah, it's another good point too. How when you think about young families that move to Northborough, why do they move to Northborough? It's because our education system, the school system, does such an excellent job preparing our kids. So I think it's, they both go hand in hand. You take away from the school budget, it's going to impact home values at some point. So,
I'm definitely not suggesting that by any stretch.
Oh,
of
no,
the
I didn't
imagination.
mean to
I'm just
imply that.
mentioning over the last several years, we've had significant increase kind of thing, and it's a trend.
yes,
And we're going to have to watch that because that trend can't continue at that
yes,
level.
yes. I didn't mean to imply that. If you took it that way, I apologize.
And I know people are moving in, but right now, if you look at the student population from last year, this year, it's gone down 5%. So.
Right, yeah. But then again, you don't know what types of students are coming in. You may have different,
Yeah.
the budget that's presented if, students may go down, but
That's
needs may
Pointing
change.
out the big increase in special education.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, obviously enrollment is something that we keep a close eye on. We have enrollment projections. It's not the first time I've heard that question. I
Well,
think the high school,
We recognize it doesn't work that way, because you can have, just because you lose one student in a classroom, you still have the cost of running that classroom.
it's
And,
too bad we
so
couldn't
it's,
lose them all at the same grade
Yeah.
level in the same class. Then we'd
you
be,
got to get all of them to leave the same school in the same classroom, and then you
Yeah.
can say, but, I just watching that trend, and it's going up fast, so.
I will share that the area where we see most volatility too is out-of-district special education placements.
Yeah.
If you look at the tuition increases over the past 5 years, and forget the 14%, the tuition percent increase for out-of-district placements have gone up 5 to 10%. And additionally, we are seeing students who need specialized instruction and residential schools that we can't just support the students in this environment. It is expensive. What we see over a 5-year trend is some years it's Northborough that actually experiences that impact to its budget as a result of a couple students. Other years it's Southborough. Other years it's the region. This year it is Northborough's.
Any other questions? Nope, good. Thank you, Greg. Next on the agenda is the Algonquin Regional High School fiscal year 2024 budget presentation.
Just give me 1 second to locate the budget. So I will not review the mission and vision, since it's the same. Save you some time. And the budget process obviously is very similar in terms of we begin the work in September. I will share what is unique to the Northborough Southborough regional budget is the fact that we rely on good data from the state in order to project our budget out. So at this point in time, the Northborough Southborough regional budget uses FY23 numbers in terms of state aid, circuit breaker reimbursement, transportation reimbursement. So we are eagerly awaiting for Governor Healy's budget to be released, hopefully in a week
March 1st.
or less. So, in terms of unknowns, so I think there are two unknowns left in the FY24 budget for Northborough Southborough. The first is, and again, we are in negotiations with the Teachers Association at Algonquin Regional High School, so that is in process. And then the unknown at this point in time is insurance rates. So again, we collaborate with the town of Northborough for health insurance. We have not received yet the final number of health insurance rate increases for this upcoming year. Through John's advocacy, through the work of the school department, we're hoping to secure that number in the next week or two, and hopefully it will be good news. But at this point in time, it is an unknown. And hopefully the rate that we find out that it actually is will impact the budget before you favorably. So the budget will decrease. In terms of budget priorities, so the regional school committee's budget priorities, maintaining high-quality instructional programming and instructional outcomes and resources for technology, maintaining class sizes according to the school committee policy, ensuring students are prepared for college and career, making sure that we're funding initiatives outlined in the district's strategic plan, Vision 2026. And this year, it also added, although not part of the operational budget, it did list making sure that seeking capital funding from the towns of Northborough and Southborough to fund the Algonquin Regional High School Athletic Complex was part of its budget priorities moving forward. So in terms of the budget process, from initial budget requests to this evening, so the leadership team at the high school and central office submitted their budget requests to the financial department, and those budget requests totaled an increase of 8.97% compared to the Northborough pre-K through 8 budget that came in at 15%. We started at a much different place in terms of getting to a budget number. In the months of November and December, the leadership team continued to sharpen its pencil. We came in, we presented a preliminary budget to the school committee of a 5.57%, and then a revised preliminary in January of a 4.5%, and then on February 15th, last week, the school committee voted its budget, which totaled $26,590,346, which represented a 3.36% increase over fiscal year 23. In terms of where the $863,265 budget increase breaks out, 45% of that is salary increases. Insurances is 26%. Utilities, 10%. Transportation, special education, 10%. And then Worcester Regional Retirement was about a 7% increase. So a
And the
little-
insurance is basically health insurance?
Health, liability, not just health insurance. So again, if you look at salary increases, insurance, Worcester Regional Retirement, about 80% of the $863,265 budget increase is going toward people. In terms of this budget before you, so the budget drivers, so Worcester Regional Retirement System, we are seeing an increase in $93,034. Again, similar to Northborough pre-K through 8, special education out-of-district transportation costs, we're seeing an increase of $124,000. Utilities, electricity and heating, $127,000. Insurances, so it's health, liability, and workers' comp. We're seeing a $331,766 increase. And then in terms of salary increases and COLAs, and again, being in a negotiation year, we're seeing an increase, anticipated increase of $574,000. So the budget drivers totaled a little over $1.2 million. One of some of the work that we did with the Student Support Services Department and the Finance Department is we are seeing special education students age out of out-of-district placements. So we are actually seeing a reduction of special education costs as a result. So students who are 22 aging out of those programs and entering into the next phase. We are seeing circuit breaker transportation reimbursement, although not at the $100,000 level for Northborough pre-K through 8, we are seeing a $20,000 offset. Retirements and leave of absences, we're seeing $121,000 offset. Special education adjustments. And then ESSER 3, we are also applying regional's portion of ESSER 3 to offset the fiscal year 24 budget. And then we have revolving accounts at the high school, so we are using lost textbooks and transcripts to purchase some curriculum materials, and that's an offset. So the total budget reductions totals a little over $1.6 million. So the budget before you does not reduce any positions at the high school, so it's truly a level services budget. However, I will share that we are using circuit breaker and looking at the trajectory in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of special education out-of-district placements. We are able to apply some of the FY24 circuit breaker funds to the FY24 budget. Typically, we hold that money so we can project out what circuit breaker money we would have for FY25. But again, our projections, we feel very comfortable with this budget, but it is a potential impact. And then again, we're using ESSER 3 money to offset this budget. We are purchasing materials, we're not adding positions, and we will need to amend the ESSER 3 budget because it is a bit different from what we had proposed when we first wrote the grant. The high school level, there were some additional staffing requests that are not included in the budget before you. Specifically, a reading tutor, a team chairperson, a library ESP. There was a request for a human resource generalist. So Northborough, Southborough's portion of that would be 0.3 of a full-time position. And then we did also receive a request to add 5 varsity assistant coaches. But we did have a conversation that as long as we're collecting fees to our student athletes, the first goal is to reduce those fees and then consider adding new coaching positions once those fees were reduced. This budget does not include any elimination of athletic fees for the fiscal year 24. Some items that are included in this budget that are noteworthy. Next year, students will no longer have to pay the student activity fee. So the school committee, beginning in fiscal year 22 and 23, reduced the student activity fee in half. So it actually is no longer a fee that students will have to pay in fiscal year 24. And that money now is incorporated into the budget before you, about $36,000. This budget also includes a new position at Algonquin Regional High School, and that is an internship-externship coordinator. So a person who can work closely with the surrounding businesses in our geographic area and identify partnerships with local businesses. We are fortunate in that the geographic area in which we sit, there's a tremendous amount of high-tech, pharmaceutical, engineering. There's a lot of professional organizations that have internship and externship opportunities. Having a person who can dedicate their time solely to trying to find and make those connections for the high school and provide students with more opportunities, I think will benefit students well. We have some money in the budget for textbooks. So we have world language textbooks, human geography textbooks, and we also have money to support the fine arts transportation. So in past years, the fine arts transportation, the students would have to fundraise that money, but to go to different musical events, the money now is included in the budget before you. And those total a little over $168,000. So what we moved on to ESSER 3, so we moved student and staff devices from the budget to ESSER 3, so that's $93,000. Translation services, so we've moved $29,000 from translation services onto ESSER 3, and then again, similar to Northborough pre-K through 8, we are required to spend a portion of ESSER 3 for learning loss. So we have a tutor salary that is being funded by ESSER III. And again, that is, ESSER III funds being used as a little over $163,000 in, to John's point, that is, that will spend down the complete amount of ESSER III that the district has at this point in time. We also moved some items from the budget to the revolving accounts. So we did move AP biology textbooks to a revolving account that we have around textbooks, and then a guidance information system as well. So those two items total a little over $21,000.
Greg, is the, if I can ask, is the intent on the, like the tutor salary and translation services, is the intent the ESSER funds are going to expire? This is the last year that you have them, so in 2025, will that then be incorporated into the base budget, or will those services be eliminated?
So the tutor salary would be a one-year focus on pandemic learning loss recovery. We do not anticipate having that position continue in the budget, so that's a 1 year. In terms of translation services, we moved translation services to ESSER III from the appropriated budget. That is a budget shortfall that we'll have to examine in fiscal year '25. But translation service does vary year to year depending on student need. The funding source or sources that we have for translation services, it's the appropriated budget. We also receive an entitlement grant, Title III, which funds translation services and a portion of our English learner development program. So in terms of enrollment, actually, so I'll wrap it up and answer questions. So our FY '24 budget that the school committee voted on February 15th totals $26,590,346, which is an increase over fiscal year '23 of 3.36%. And the recommended budget increase total is $863,265. So I will stop and answer any questions, and then I'd be happy to speak to the impact of this budget on Northborough's assessment.
Okay, Tony?
In the part of the presentation, you mentioned there's a new position of an internship, externship coordinator. Is that an increase in services?
It is. That is something that we have, our guidance department was doing a small portion of it, but we just don't have the capacity to actually have a person go out full-time, network with businesses and companies, seek internships, align those experiences with student schedules, and get our juniors and seniors involved in the work-study programs.
Yeah, Tony?
This might be jumping ahead because you were going to talk about assessment, but partly that depends on enrollment. So some of the enrollment figures that I'm seeing in here, is that something you were going to get to later, or
No, I mean,
should I ask about that?
yeah, you can ask about that.
So I have a chart here which shows, the percentage, the October
Yeah.
first enrollment split between Northborough and Southborough. If I'm reading this correctly, for FY '24, it's 62.59% Northborough, which is up very slightly from the year before. One thing I'm puzzled about is how do you get the October 1st enrollments for FY '25 and '26?
Projections.
Okay.
I will share that what we are seeing in terms of one impact that has on enrollments is the number of eighth graders, both at Milliken who matriculate into ninth grade at Algonquin and Southborough. So we've seen a slight decrease of Melick and eighth graders enrolling at Algonquin Regional High School. For some reason, we are seeing a number of the move-ins and move-outs happen in eighth grade. Students who are families who are leaving the community. So that is attributed to that decrease. But we are seeing an increase of Trotter Middle School students from Southborough enroll in ninth grade at Algonquin at a greater rate. So I think if you look over the past 3 years, we were at 81% of Trotter eighth graders enrolling at Algonquin to this year, what we're projecting is about 95%. So we've seen a significant increase, which helps Northborough's balancing out that assessment in terms of enrollment numbers.
Any other questions?
So I will go over quickly the assessment. What we are anticipating Northborough's assessment of the 3.36% budget. So just go over it quickly. So again, an asterisk. We do not know Chapter 78. We do not know regional transportation. We do not. We are waiting for those numbers. So special education circuit breaker. So all of the calculations that I'm going to share with you are based on FY23 state aid numbers. I'm hopeful that the data will come in more favorable, but it's hard to predict what the numbers will actually be. So again, with the $26,590,346 budget, we subtract our Chapter 70 regional transportation. We have revenues, which is about $20,000 from the aggregate budget, and that is the FY24 budget after offsets. That is $22,525,145. The state then assigns a minimum local contribution amount to each of the communities, Northborough and Southborough. Again, so the Northborough minimum local contribution that we are applying to this FY24 budget at this point in time is Northborough's FY23 minimum local contribution, which was $8,072,316. Southborough's was $5,134,573. We subtract those two from the budget offsets, and that is the FY24 budget after required contribution. So that budget number is going to be $9,318,256, and that is apportioned by the regional agreement by enrollment percentages. So in Northborough, its apportionment and minimum local contribution totals $13,776,952, which is a difference of $943,445 over fiscal year 23, which represented a 7.35% increase to its assessment. The school committee is applying $675,000 of E&D, which again is used to minimize the impact of the assessment to the taxpayer. So adding $530,220 of E&D to Northborough's portion, the percent increase to Northborough is 4.13% at this point in time. This is the first year there was real parity between Northborough and Southborough's assessment. Northborough's assessment is going up 4.13%. Southborough's assessment is going up 3.89%. So it's the closest it's been, I think, in some time, where I think you folks all are aware of the years where it's been 10% in one community and 0 in another, and then a reverse of it. It's hard to predict. And again, the next week and a half will be telling, because we will get FY '24 state aid, Chapter 70 transportation numbers that we can plug into our formulas and see where we are in terms of FY '24.
Great, just a quick question. You've got the enrollment comparison chart,
Yes.
and then there's the assessment calculation. I'm just curious, I assume one is an earlier forecast or estimate for FY '24.
If you're looking at the budget memo, or it's in the, let's say,
And then it just has for fiscal '24, Northborough's enrollment at 62.59%. And then on the calculation sheet for the assessment, it has a 61.22. I just assume it's a timing issue.
I believe so, but I will confirm, John.
I like the number you have on the assessment, so I shouldn't say anything.
Excuse me.
Along those lines, these are based on the actual October 1st enrollments.
Correct.
So that would be October 1st of 2020.
Great.
We're not there yet, 2022. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So this past October 1,
And is that,
2022.
there's a graph here where it has actual numbers of students on these bars. So FY '24, is that based on October 2020?
Yeah, so FY '24 is our enrollment projections based on NASDAQ, who does our enrollment projections.
Oh, NASA, so then, how is the split determined?
So the split
Because
is,
that's based on actual data, right? At the school on October 1st, there were so many kids from North
Correct.
and so many from South.
correct. So the FY '24, if you're looking at the chart, the bar chart, so the 1181 should mirror the October 1 enrollment projections in the packet. Let me just find it. Just give me 1 second. I can tell you the exact number that should be on the chart. I can confirm. So, 1180, I believe on the chart it says 1181. So that is using, that number is developed by using the current 8th grade class and moving them up to freshmen. And then above the 1216 is the October 1 number that we're using for the apportionment, which is 1216.
1216? On the bar chart, it says 1181.
So 1181 is for, so that's what we're actually projecting. But enrollment, the apportionment uses October 1, 2022 for the apportionment. So that number is 1216.
1216,
Yep.
and how many of those are from Northborough and Southborough?
So we have 742 from Northborough, 470 from Southborough, So it's 61.22% of Northborough, and then the difference, 38.78% Southborough.
Thank you.
And I believe that ties out with a number on that chart, John.
Any questions?
Any sense of, in terms of sensitivity analysis, assume we get a 1% increase in state aid, how that filters through to our assessment?
Yes, so I think that, I think the minimum local contribution is the number that is the most difficult to project.
Yeah, that's.
So I hesitate to even make any statement. I think that any increase to regional transportation, Chapter 70, is going to impact Northborough greater because it pays a greater portion of the budget. So I'm thinking potentially, if those numbers come in favorably and we projected it, the minimum local contribution well, we could see that number decrease by 1% in terms of the overall assessment.
I always forget the minimum contribution. I don't know if this, I'm trying to think of who was on the committee, Rick and Janice and Tony, where we actually had somebody from the state come in and try to explain how they do the calculation, and I was more confused after they left than before. So it's like this crazy calculation, but that's probably a bigger factor than anything else.
Exactly.
So, all right. But in any case, the 4.13% increase in the assessment should be the high water mark.
We were.
If the minimum contribution goes up, we'll get some state aid, it shouldn't drive that number up.
We tried to be very conservative in the numbers in our projections, so that is, the intent is to have that number come down and that be the ceiling percent increase for both communities.
And just so, for folks at home that may not know, because it's a change of administration, we discussed this at a prior meeting with the Healy administration coming in. Normally, we have our first glimpse in state aid the third Wednesday in January. That's when the governor is required to file their budget. That's not the final state aid number, but it usually gives you a pretty good sense of what we're looking at. And then it will tweak a little bit as it makes its way through the House and the Senate. But because we have a new governor coming in, that January, that third week in Wednesday in January, it became March 1st. So that's a significant amount of time. So we're all waiting. We discussed again at your last meeting, the revenue consensus hearing that was conducted at the state level is projecting a 1.6% increase in state revenues. That doesn't translate directly into a 1.6% increase in our state aid. But that's not a very robust number, and then as it makes its way through, we'll get our first glimpse in a couple of weeks, but it's one of the unknowns in this upcoming budget. But generally speaking, we tend to be a minimum aid community. One of the things that we'll be discussing at Monday's Board of Selectmen meeting is our legislative priorities. We have a draft, and one of the things that we're advocating for is to increase that minimum student aid of $30 up to $100, because one of the reasons we get impacted negatively is that any increase in state aid is really primarily being siphoned off and going to implement the Student Opportunity Act, which is designed to divert increases to districts in need. Northborough isn't one of those districts that's going to benefit much. You mentioned earlier in your presentation, might have been an ELL line or something like that, where we saw a little bit under the Student Opportunity Act, but in general, it's going to go to poorer districts. So without that increase in the per student figure, our chapter 70, state aid, which is our education aid, isn't likely to move a whole lot, so. But anyway, we're not gonna really know those numbers for a couple more weeks, so,
A few more sleepless nights.
yeah.
Yeah, Tony?
It's a question that always comes up and sometimes confuses people. You have a 3.36% budget, but the assessments are going up by 4%, basically. Where does the difference come in?
So the assessment's just based on enrollment and apportionment. So there's really,
But I mean, the total assessment to both towns.
the total assessment to
It's
both,
going up 3.89 for Southborough and 4.13
correct,
for Northborough.
yeah,
And that's despite a budget that only goes up 3.36%.
correct. And that is just the apportionment of what's remaining once the offsets, once you subtract the minimum local contribution. You know, and there's really, there's not a lot of control of that number. So we work from creating an aggregate budget increase and then let the apportionments, the statutory apportionment and the regional apportionment kind of work its way through. The only impact that the school committee has to reduce that number is using E&D to minimize the assessment. I wish I had more control of that number.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just following through on that, after expending these E&D funds, what's your reserve going to be?
So the school committee has a policy of maintaining between 3.25 and 3.75 E&D. So expending the 675, it still will be within its policy. And at the end of fiscal year 23, if we've done our job well and budgeted well, we should be able to put some money back into that E&D account so that, again, we can look to fiscal year 25 and reducing the assessments using E&D. So I think we'll have, specifically, approximately, we will have $600,000, $650,000 in our E&D account after expending the 675.
Any other questions?
I don't know if we're covering it. Why, I was just wondering, why is this small pamphlet on the Pelican Middle School, why is this school singled out as compared to our other grade schools?
Can I see it? So that is the public hearing. So Melican is the location of the public hearing, so that's the only reason that's on there. It's just to denote the public hearing location for folks who might want to attend the hearing.
This is the budget, it's just the cover is the handout that will be at the March 1st public hearing.
So the other schools wouldn't be considered for that?
Yeah, so if we had it at Lincoln Street School, because all our school committee meetings are at Melican, but if we had it at another school, we would point to Lincoln Street or.
I just had a couple questions concerning this one. What was in there? Yeah, the teacher specialists and substitutes have gone up quite a bit, percentage-wise, and it's
This is this is the K-8 budget you're looking
the
at.
K to 8.
Yeah, so specifically that is due to the number of substitutes that we've had to employ and use as a result of faculty and staff absences. So our COVID policy remains that if you're out with COVID, there is a threshold of days that you have to be out. We're also asking educators to be very mindful if they're not feeling well to stay home. That has resulted in an increase in our substitute line, and specifically also some of the nurse coverage that has been required. So that is that increase primarily.
So we're assuming that the COVID will remain just as active in the coming year as in the past year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing our absences trend in a positive manner. There are less absences. Hopefully that number will decrease over time.
Okay. We had a large decrease on textbooks, instructional material, and instructional hardware. Is that just because we already have it all and we don't need it anymore?
So that is because we're shifting those purchases to ESSER 3. So that is where you're seeing the shift from appropriated budget to ESSER 3. So we're just purchasing it using a different funding source, and that is ESSER 3, the grant that we receive, similar to the town's ARPA funds.
And one last one, it's a very small, it's a large percentage-wise, but it's not much money-wise. I was wondering why the school committee is requesting more money, about $5,000 more.
Let's see.
It's the very first item under administrative, 1,000.
It does seem like a lot. Give me 1 second. It's a 42% increase.
Right.
I'll have to look specifically. I don't have an answer to that. I want to, I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't want to give you misinformation.
That's all I had on that.
Any other questions? All set? You good, Joe?
Did you want to touch up on the athletic complex before, since you're here?
Sure. So,
And it will be going, this is on the town meeting warrant in both Northborough and Southborough, so.
I will be quick and happy to answer any questions around the athletic complex project. So the athletic complex basically is beyond its useful life. The bleachers, the lighting, the track were installed in mid-90s. The track was actually reconstructed in 1994, and it is seen its use. The track is deteriorating. We have patched it over the years, but it is beyond its actual useful life. Tracks typically last anywhere between 12 to 15 years. So we are actually, again, going on 18 to 20 years. It doesn't meet MIA standards. And again, we are seeing a lot of high school track programs deciding not to play on come to our track because it's just unsafe and potentially causing a lot of injuries. Our stadium field, when the 2004 renovation took place, was just top-seeded. The soil is heavily impacted. One of the challenges with New England fields is that we're not able to rest fields the way they need to be rested. A typical field for high school grass has about 250 hours a season, and it needs to be rested. We're far beyond its use in terms of time. The tennis courts were installed in 2004. Significant cracking cannot be patched. We've done some repairs over the years, but the underlayment, the base layer really has failed and needs to be replaced, and it has gone beyond its useful life. And then looking for multi-purpose fields, again, providing field access to our community, our youth sports organizations, our Algonquin athletic program, our PE programs, so adding a second multi-purpose field. And then just in general, in terms of health and safety, upgrading the grandstand to be ADA compliant, making sure our amenities building is ADA compliant, and then ensuring that the lighting is sufficient and meets current lighting standards. So the plan is to replace the track, add a stadium field with turf, adding a multi-purpose field with turf, upgrading the grandstands so it's ADA compliant with seating, adding stadium lights with LED, upgrading the tennis courts. So currently we have 9 tennis courts. We are converting 2 of those tennis courts, 1 to a basketball court, and then we'll have 3 pickleball courts. So in the end, we'll have 7 tennis courts, 3 pickleball courts, and 1 basketball court. The plan is to renovate the amenities building and add the required ADA compliant restrooms. We also are proposing the installation of an amphitheater for outdoor concerts, musical performances, and a lacrosse wall. In terms of who benefits, so we do think that Algonquin students will benefit, student athletes, students who engage in PE classes will benefit from a modern facility. I think the use of a turf field will provide increased field access to our athletic program at the high school, our PE classes, and the community. I think in terms of residents, the track will be a great running and walking location. Tennis courts, pickleball courts, and basketball courts will serve communities well. Northborough and Southborough Recreation will be able to expand access to the recreation departments. And then lastly, youth sports programs in communities of Northborough and Southborough. So the overall project, including upgrading the amenities building and design and construction period services, totals $7,960,393. Ideally, we would have timed it when the high school debt for the renovation fell off, which is in 2027, and then we would take on a new project after that debt fell off. However, that current athletic complex is in need now. Our intention is actually to go out for bond anticipation. So actually not issue the bonds until 2027. So interest would be a responsibility of both communities for 2 years. In 2027, there'd be 1 year of overlap where we'd have the high school renovation project in 2027 and the athletic complex project. And after 2027, the only debt assessment would be the athletic project moving forward. We do anticipate going out for a 15-year bond. And we are anticipating that in Northborough, the average single-family house, the impact for this project on the average house is going to be $72.55 after we have that 1 year of both debts on the books, the reconstruction of Algonquin Regional High School and the athletic project. We are anticipating that there would be a 12-cent increase to the overall tax rate as a result of this project. Northborough's share of the total cost of the project is $4,961,333, and Southborough's estimated project cost will be $2,999,060. And that also has a 12% contingency built in, and that is due to the current volatile market of goods, services, and supplies. We're hoping that the bids come in favorably, and then actually that contingency does not need to be used, and that's another a little under $1 million taken off this overall project. In terms of moving forward, the school committee will make a decision whether to vote and approve approve this project at its March 15th meeting, it needs a 2/3 vote to approve this project. If it does vote in the affirmative, then it has 2 days to notify the select boards that it does intend to authorize debt. So by March 17th, that communication will go to the Board of Selectmen in Northborough and Southborough. Then the community has 60 days to do two things. It can bring it before it's a legislative body, town meetings, for majority vote, or it can do nothing, take no action. If it takes no action on the 61st day, the regional school system could authorize the bond for this project and move forward. We are timing it. The reason why the March 15th is so that we are within the window of the town meetings, so that the town of Northborough and the town of Southborough don't need to call special town meetings to put this on the ballot. This will be a warrant article before the voters in Northborough and Southborough at the town meetings in the upcoming months.
What happens if one approves and one doesn't?
So if one community does not approve, then the project fails. Then it goes back to the drawing board to revise more conversations with the community about why. And then we start the process again. We represent a proposal to the school committee votes. The towns have 60 days.
Same thing, just repeats itself.
And we move through that process again. The intent, if it does pass, this is something the community, the voters are interested in moving forward with. Our intent is to begin the project this spring, in time for completion of the fall athletic season. So our intention is to have the project wrapped up by the end of August, if all things go accordingly.
So in a nutshell, it's just old.
And then, if it were a car, it would have 500,000 miles, and it would have traveled around, gotten us around and did its job well. There's not a mile left on that car that we could have used, so I think it's been a great asset to the community. Some people will share you could have repaired it sooner. My argument is we got the most out of it, and now it's time to upgrade it for the next generation of students and student athletes.
If I may, just a couple things just to clarify. So, unlike most debt votes at town meeting, we are not the issuing authority. It's actually the regional high school, which is why when it goes to town meeting, it will be a simple majority vote for us. It will not be a 2/3 vote. I know some of you were like, that sounds strange, it should be a 2/3 vote, but that's why. The other thing is, as the superintendent mentioned, we're still paying for our share of the expansion renovation project at the high school. Northborough's share of that roughly $60 million project was about $14 million after MSBA paid a good chunk of it, and then it gets split through the regional agreement between Northborough and Southborough. So our share remaining debt, we pay through a debt assessment of about $663,000 a year. That's what the superintendent's referring to. That debt payment falls off in 2027 or 2028, which is why we've been talking about, well, that's a good time for this to come on, if we could have one drop off. Like we do with all of our projects, you want to kind of smooth that debt. You don't want to have wild swings. But by issuing bond anticipation notes, bands, they're interest only. Typically, you do that while the project's under construction, and then when you know what the final cost is, you issue the permanent debt. So when you issue that permanent debt, there's going to be 1 year where we're still paying for that high school renovation project, and we're going to be paying for the permanent debt for this project if it passes. That's the year where you're going to feel it, and then the next year, the renovation project falls off, and then it drops down to that roughly $67 per single family home. So that's how it's kind of cycling in all of it. So I hope that helped explain things a little bit.
We don't anticipate, the high school does not anticipate any other large capital projects in the next, 10 to 15 years either. So this, this will be the primary debt assessment that the communities will feel for the next decade and a half.
And just like the high school renovation addition project, this will come to us just as a debt assessment. So every year, we get the operating budget and the debt assessment, and we pay it. So we won't be issuing the debt, it won't show up. Although when we do our analysis, when we look at our debt, we have a somewhat more sophisticated view of it. We look at not only the debt that Northborough is responsible, but we look at our overlapping debt. So debt that we're ultimately responsible through other entities like the regional high school or ASABEN. The bottom line is our overall debt levels are ridiculously low at the moment because we were planning to do the fire station project, which we should have gotten done if the pandemic hadn't hit. So because we've had those couple of years, we've actually seen the debt really drop down. We're well below 5% of the operating budget going to debt service. And our models are, we want to be below 10%. So we're actually hovering between 3.5% and 4% at the moment. So on the town side, we're ready to do the fire station project. Overall, this will just be a debt assessment through the high school, ultimately, which it will impact the taxpayers, just through a different venue or avenue rather.
Yes, Frank?
Outside of this flyer now, the only thing I really know about this athletic complex is what I read in the paper. And the only thing I was wondering about, we definitely know how much our football fields cost us in the past because they saw the maintenance and everything on that. And, they've been there for decades. How does the turf field fare out as far as upkeep and longevity and cost?
Yeah, so our maintenance on our football fields, fertilizer, watering, and approximately $65,000 for the main stadium field and the multipurpose field. We are anticipating the new cost of maintaining the turf fields to be between $15,000 and $20,000 on an annual basis. The turf needs to be replaced every 10 to 12 years. Part of our plan is actually creating a revenue source through rentals that will go into a fund to fund the purchasing or the replacement of the turf when it comes time. We do anticipate that we'll be able to garner significant revenue as a result of facilities rentals, which we haven't been able to capture just because we can't allow our fields to be used because they're grass fields at this point in time.
It sounds good, but I was thinking way back to my younger days when they were putting AstroTurf and all the professional players didn't like it. They wanted to go back to the natural sod.
Yeah, I think that I will share that the Tennessee Titans, the National Football League, they are replacing their stadium. There's been some controversy around turf and not turf. The Tennessee Titans are replacing their fields with the same turf that we're recommending, and the same, it's called EnviroFill, the same EnviroFill. We're not using crumb rubber. It simulates more like a regular grass field, and we're also adding a shock pad, which is underneath the turf, so it really feels and acts more like the experience of playing on regular grass. I think the reality is we live in New England. It's really hard to maintain grass fields in New England when you have the freeze-thaw seasons that we have. We do feel like this will extend our season and make it a more safe environment for our student athletes over the course of the seasons that they play.
So use modified cleats so they don't tear it up as much.
Yeah, I guess, there's specialized cleats athletes can wear. I don't stay on top of it anymore, but.
Oh, yeah, it's great. My son was playing baseball. We had to have one set of cleats for grass, which were metal, and then the rubber ones for the turf. So depending on where you were playing, you had to make sure you had multiple sets of shoes.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to John, and he can make sure I get those. Or you can reach out to me
Thank
directly.
you.
Thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is an update on the fiscal year 2024 capital budget.
So in your packet, you'll have a memo or a table that looks like this. This is the revised capital budget, essentially, again, just for our viewers at home. We have a 6-year capital improvement plan that contains all the investments in our buildings, equipment, and infrastructure we plan to make over the next 6 years. The first year of that capital improvement plan is the capital budget. Those are the projects that are intended to go to town meeting for action and funding. So this is the revised capital budget that will go to the upcoming town meeting. The only thing that's really changed are the funding sources from what was provided to you in previous communications. If you recall, there was the Proctor School roof on here for $1.7 million. That is now no longer going to town meeting because last Monday, or the Monday prior, the Board of Selectmen voted to release $1.7 million in ARPA funds to pay for that school. However, they did not choose to release ARPA funds for $900,000 for the fire engine replacement or the $475,000 for the highway garage tight tank, which is a DEP environmental compliance issue. This committee voted unanimously to recommend ARPA funds for those 3 projects, so they would not be on the town meeting warrant, because if they go to town meeting, they're going to be required to be funded with debt, which is going to add to the tax impact. However, those 2 remaining projects that weren't funded by the Board of Selectmen with ARPA, the engine and the tight tank, those both need to be done. They cannot be postponed. So they are still included in the capital budget. The only difference is you look at the column all the way to the right, instead of saying ARPA grant, it says general, basically general obligation bonds, so general fund bonds. In total, the projects going to town meeting are $2,830,000. Of that, roughly $1.1 million will be used in pay-as-you-go free cash. There's another $350,000 that will come out of the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund free cash. So there's no additional tax impact and no additional rate impact for those. And then the engine and the tight tank project total $1,375,000. Those will be funded, or are proposed to be funded with debt service. But these are the projects, again, just briefly for the viewers at home. There will be 3 police cruisers are being replaced for $190,000. We are back with this appropriation. We're back on our schedule of doing 3 vehicles 1 year, 2 vehicles the next, and 3, 2, 3, 2. We got off that schedule when we delayed a cruiser during the pandemic. Police station exterior repairs and painting at $70,000. The fire engine replacement at $900,000. Under the highway, we have the roadway improvements. It's $300,000. That's what we use to supplement the operating budget to get to our $1.1 million of investment in our roadways. That's free cash, so $300,000. A 20-ton dump truck replacement at $355,000. The highway garage tight tank at $475,000. A 1-ton dump truck with plow replacement at $150,000. Then we have 2, so the DPW projects total $1,280,000. Then we have the 2 DPW Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund project. One is a acquisition of a 15-ton dump truck for $225,000. And then the SCADA, which is basically a remote electronic monitoring system of all of our key infrastructure, water and sewer. So the water valve from the MWRA, the water tank, the sewer pump station. We were lucky enough, Scott Charpentier, to get a grant. So this is our matching portion. We had a grant for $491,000. We need, that's 80% of the project phase. and we need to come up with a 20%, which is $125,000. Last but not least, under the schools, K-8, we are going to replace the back walkway entrance for $40,000. So again, in total, these projects, 10 projects, there'll be 10 separate warrant articles for these projects going to town meeting. If you turn the page, I provided you with the updated proposed free cash plan. It's roughly the same in that we're using the same amount for the appropriation committee's reserve fund, same amount in the operating budget, same amount in stabilization. If you go down to the bottom line, we usually like to leave $500,000 of free cash remaining for emergencies during the course of the year, just as part of our financial reserves. Our financial reserves are comprised of our stabilization fund, think of that as your savings account, and our free cash, think of that as like a checking account. So we always leave $500,000. This year I'm proposing to only leave $460,000, and it's simply because we could not fit all of these projects and the Z School back walkway entrance for $40,000. It's become a safety issue and it needs to be done. That could have been funded with ARPA, as any of these could have been funded with ARPA, but we didn't even bring it forward because we were focused on these two, the three main projects that we couldn't fit somehow, some way with available funds. At least using a little bit more in free cash, the $40,000, again, it's available funds. It allows that project to move forward, and obviously we're not going to issue debt for a $40,000 project. So very similar. Really, the only difference is we're leaving $40,000 less, and we're spending $40,000 more, so that we can fit that Z School back entrance project, because that was a priority of the school department. And when we toured the building, it has become a safety tripping hazard. It needs to be done. So that's the revised capital budget. Those are the articles that will be going forward to town meeting.
Just so I'm clear, on the capital budget, free cash of 1.1 million, that has no tax impact, correct?
No tax impact, no additional tax impact, right? We're using budget surplus from the prior year.
And then the $350,000 from the enterprise fund, free cash, has no tax impact, correct?
No tax impact, and because it's coming out of essentially free cash of the enterprise funds, it has no additional rate impact either.
And then since the Board of Selectmen elected not to use the ARPA funds for the fire engine and the tight tank, those are the only two projects that are gonna have a tax impact on residents, because we didn't use the ARPA funds.
Correct. So they're not being funded with available funds, which means, and obviously they're big enough that we can't fit them, because we couldn't really fit the projects that we had. So those will be, an authorization will be sought at the meeting to issue bonds for those two projects. And there's nothing, I mean, again, there's nothing illegal about that. We've just had a practice since fiscal 2012 of if we have available funds, we use them so that we aren't taking on debt. And that's why our debt level is so low. However, the caveat is that fire station, we talked about the high school project. You remember, Tony, you remember the high school project. You were very heavily involved in that. The debt service, it was a $60 million project. Our share was $14 million. The fire station project is going to be somewhere in the magnitude of $20 million with no state grants or funds to help offset that. That's going to have, a significant tax impact. We also have a feasibility study that's starting on the town hall. We didn't need to put money into this building or relocate to 4 West Main Street when that comes back to us and renovate that building or build something new. And then thirdly, the superintendent, he didn't mention it tonight, but on the capital side, Peasley Elementary School is in the queue. They're going to be submitting a statement of interest to MSBA. Usually it takes 2 or 3 years in that cycle before MSBA will pick up your project. So those 3 big projects are going to be, by necessity, their size, they'll be funded with debt. So our debt service will go back up from a low of, 3.75%, 4% of the operating budget, will go back up to probably around 7% of the operating budget, maybe 8%. So it's gonna have a significant tax impact for us. We also have the Algonquin Athletic Complex that you heard about tonight, that's coming in as well. These two projects, if funded with debt, will add about $30 to the average single-family home for the next $30 every year for the next 10 years. So, but this is the revised capital budget. This was approved by the Financial Planning Committee at their meeting last week. So these projects will go forward. They will be included in the warrant. And they're all unanimously, they've been unanimously approved. The one that you'll notice doesn't show up on this because it's not the town of Northborough capital budget is the athletic complex that will be coming forward as a separate article from the high school, regional high school. Okay.
Yeah, Tony.
So you're going to have slightly less free cash than you expected, but what does that do in terms of the reserve funds?
That's a good question. So what we try to do, you remember, if you look up in that proposed free cash chart, you'll see that we're actually putting aside $200,000 into the stabilization fund. So, we have our financial reserves, our savings account, our rainy day fund. As our budgets go up each year, 3.5% or more, as a percentage of the operating budget, it drops down. And we want to be between 8 and 10%. So it's the stabilization fund and whatever you have left remaining for free cash, those are your reserves. So based on this free cash plan, our financial reserves will be around 8%. The $40,000 difference on a percentage basis is going to be negligible. But it is important to note, this is the first time that we haven't left that, $500,000. And in the case anybody's wondering, what's the magic of $500,000? Why do we leave that aside? Well, we roll forward out of budget surplus from one year, $500,000 into the next operating budget. And we minimize that, and $500,000, when we did that under the policy, is roughly 1%. So we don't want to create a structural deficit. But we also recognize that when we're forecasting our revenues, we need to be conservative because you cannot end out the year in the red. That's very, very bad. So, at least 1% of that budget surplus at the end of the year, we roll forward into the next operating budget. So let's just say something really bad happened, like, a pandemic, and all heck breaks loose, right? And suddenly you have no revenues and you're in trouble. Well, first of all, we're eliminating how much we're using of one-time revenues in the operating budget to that 1%, less than $500,000. And we always leave that 1% there. So basically what it means is if something bad happened, we'd have another year to figure out how to address it. It's not an immediate structural deficit that has to be addressed. And overall, it's part of our reserve policy of trying to, our policy is technically 5 to 10% of your operating budget in financial reserves. The bond rating agencies want to see us between 8 and 10%, based on our socio-demographics and the wealth factors of our community. So in terms of our maintaining our bond rating, they really want to see us, between 8 and 10%. So we tend to bounce around between 8 and 8.5%, which is a good place to be. So I wouldn't reduce that, anymore, but the 40,000 isn't going to make or break us. We'll still be at 8%, a little over 8%, which is where we need to be for bond rating. It's important also to show the consistency of your reserves, because when we do go out for what will be the single largest bond issuance in the town's history for the fire station, you want to make sure that you can point back that, hey, listen, even during the pandemic, our reserves never dipped below 8%. We never defaulted on anything. We never had any issues. We never had to use our rainy day fund. Those are all things that show that you have good short-term plans for addressing economic shocks to your system. Just so people don't think, oh, we've got all this money. Had the federal government not come forward with the CARES Act funding and the ARPA funding, unprecedented amount of aid, we would have been making very different budget decisions for fiscal '23 and '24. But what we did was, we were able to buy ourselves time to wait for that federal aid. We knew we didn't have to slash and cut everything. We could sit tight and see if that aid came through. If it didn't, then we have time to make good, well thought out budget cuts, like renegotiating labor contracts or bidding out health insurance or doing things like that, rather than just slashing all the budget. So it worked, frankly, perfectly for us, because we put the money, we delayed some capital, we left some reserves on the table, we positioned ourselves so that if the state and federal money didn't come, we had a plan. We had a plan. Luckily, we didn't need to use it.
I'd also like to say too, that by having that 8 to 10% set aside, and that improves our bond rating, which reduces the interest rates, which when you go into a project for a fire station for $20 million, any reduction in interest rate is going to translate into significant savings over the life of the bond. So relative to, thinking of the budget of the town of $70+ million, to have this money available ultimately saves the taxpayers money, because we get a much more favorable interest rate on all of our debt. And then going back to the capital projects that are coming down the line, they're all significant, big number projects. So again, any savings that you get or any reduction in interest rates is going to translate into significant tax savings.
And the reason why, under our free cash policy, I'm required to put a plan together is because I need to show to you that if you spend this much on capital, put this much in the operating budget, our reserves will still be at 8%. That's why the policy requires this exercise, so we don't just spend and then go, oh my gosh, our reserves just dipped down to 6% and we're getting ready to go out to be rated by Moody's for this large bond issuance. They're gonna ding our creditworthiness on that. So every year I have to, in accordance with the policy, show the plan how we're gonna use these funds. And again, part of that plan is, moving 200,000 into the stabilization fund, which helps bolster our reserves, so. But it is tempting to just, when you have all these needs, to just spend more of that free cash and not maintain those reserves. It forces you to be disciplined.
Any other questions? Yes.
So the ARPA funds are strictly in the purview of the selectmen. No other entity in town, nor the townspeople have any say where the money goes or how it's used. And I find it rather disappointing that the selectmen didn't fund these other objects, because I believe that this is going to add, maybe John can knows the exact numbers, but without their funding on these, I believe that's, we'll get another $40 or so into your tax rate.
It's gonna be about $30. It would have been about $61 if the Proctor roof wasn't funded at 1.7. That's out now, but the other two remaining projects, the engine at 900, tight tank at 475,000, it's about $27, $30 a year on the average single family home tax bill for the next 10 years. So about $300 in total.
So the selectmen had it within their grasp to save all the townspayers that tax money and decided, for whatever reason, not to.
John? Well, Tim, the fire engine and the tight tank, I imagine, will come up as articles on the warrant. Can they be amended by the townspeople? Can somebody get up and say they'll fund these, an amendment to fund these using ARPA?
That's a possibility. You can't, town meeting can't compel the board of selectmen to release those funds and expend them for that purpose, though. The amendment, you could make that amendment, but it wouldn't be binding on the board.
But perhaps it would indicate to the selectmen that the townspeople don't want a piggy bank.
would stop actually getting the engine though, wouldn't it, if that was put in as a stipulation?
If the funding source was modified at town meeting to be ARPA, then it would be up to the board whether or not to release the funds to buy the engine. If they chose not to, then the engine would not be purchased.
Any other questions?
Just one other thing, I will forward to you, tomorrow night, the Financial Planning Committee is meeting. They're reviewing their report to town meeting, which is always something that informs this body because you hear about the capital projects, but you will delve into them at the same level of detail that the Financial Planning Committee does. So they're going to approve their report tomorrow night. They have voted unanimously to recommend all of these projects with the exception of the athletic complex. And it was a 3-1 vote. The one member had a conflict because he is actually on the committee for that athletic complex. So under advice of town council, he recused himself. The other 3 members voted in favor of recommendation, just so you have that. But I'll send you the report so you can see their assessment of the projects.
Thanks, John. Next on the agenda is a review of town meeting warrant summary.
Yeah, I actually sent you in the packet a little memo just to let you know, I don't have that summary for you tonight. The summary is being completed and is going to be going to the Board of Selectmen for their meeting on Monday night. So I hope to have this done a week ago, but with some of the delays in the ARPA decisions impacted what was on the warrant and the budget and so forth. So when that packet is ready, it'll be actually ready Friday afternoon. It'll be up on the website. It's just a summary listing of the articles. It's not the full text. It's not the motions. It's an attempt to compile everything that we have received that we anticipate going forward to town meeting. So that'll get finished up probably tomorrow. It'll be available on the website on Friday. You can check it out there, or I will email it to you, and we can discuss it at the next meeting. There's no real surprises there. The capital was one of the big things that was sort of in flux. There are 15 zoning articles, though, so. I won't be at town meeting, by the way, so.
Those are not too much.
So the town meeting will
You
probably
look
go over
sad.
lights.
I'm very broken up about that. I had to attend another town meeting in another town, though, in Foxborough, so it's not like I get away scot-free. So I'll get you that summary as soon as it is available.
Thank you, John. Our next meeting is March 1st at 7 PM. Any other business for the committee?
Just mentioning in terms of your meeting on next week, it'll be a finance office, the debt budget, health insurance, community preservation projects. There's also going to be a reserve fund transfer. So we had a boiler went in this building that had to be replaced. And so the finance director's coming in to present, and we'll be seeking a transfer from the Appropriations Committee's reserve account to deal with that unanticipated capital issue. On the upside, well, I shouldn't speak too soon, it hasn't snowed a lot, so our snow budget, although it costs us more money to throw salt down sometimes because the salt is expensive and the trucks are still out there moving. We haven't had a lot of snow, but we had quite a few sanding events. Tomorrow's going to be another one with the sleet. But at this point, I'll knock on wood, the snow and ice budget is still in the black, well in the black, so hopefully we should be fine.
Can you ask the selectmen for the ARPA funds to pay for the boiler first?
Have we seen anything, you sent a note out about there's some questions about the Assabet Valley budget? Have you
Yes.
gotten any, you mentioned we hadn't gotten any information yet. Have we gotten anything?
I've gotten some preliminary numbers. What happened was when they sent over some information, and they sent it as, this is how much is going up, but they combined the operating and the debt. So it was an 18% increase, which I sort of
Heart
started to have a bit of a stroke over, and then we were able to get some clarification, and so I still don't have a formal assessment from them, but we will. They're scheduled, it's funny, everybody's asked to be delayed, because like you heard from the superintendent, they don't know their state numbers. They haven't even gotten a first peek, so they're like, can you push us off to later in your meeting schedule? Everybody wants to go late, including me, so.
Right.
But they're on your schedule for March 8th. They'll be coming in. The other two is, they'll be coming in with police and fire. The police and fire budgets are last. They're usually first. They are last because we are still in negotiations with the fire union and the police union. So I'm hopeful, we're really close. I'm hopeful that we'll settle, and then we can finalize those budgets and not have to do a two-step. So everything is coming in late, and just like the superintendent mentioned too, our health insurance, I still don't have a health insurance budget, a final increase, so we're waiting to get that.
You may not be able to leave.
I got a hard stop on March 31st, which is why that's why we're pressing so hard to get this stuff done. I'm being pretty brutal on the health consultant that, look, I need this, I need to get this stuff all packaged up, and the budget and town meeting packaged up before I go. But it's hard, because I'm relying on Assabet, the superintendent, and it's not his fault. If he doesn't have his state aid numbers, he can't tell you what the assessment is. I can't finalize the warrant. I can't tell you what the overall tax impact is. So it's, we'll get there. We'll get there. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Any other business? Motion to adjourn? Motion by Janice, second by George. All those in favor? All those opposed? We are adjourned.
8:05 p.m. for the record. Thank you very much.